There's a dangerous idea that makes many women believe wealth is something distant, elitist, or unattainable, as if living well depended only on money, luck, or privilege. But the truth is more uncomfortable, and at the same time, liberating. Wealthy women think differently long before they earn differently. They build their lives from the inside out, with quiet habits, invisible decisions, and attitudes that cost absolutely nothing, but change everything. These secrets aren't found in expensive books or exclusive spaces. They show up in the way these women talk to themselves, in what they tolerate, what they reject, and especially in what they do when no one is watching. While many are waiting for money to change their lives, wealthy women change their lives, and the money comes later. If you feel ready to break out of the same cycle, raise your standards, and adopt a new approach to life, these secrets might be the turning point you've been waiting for. Before we dive in, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and stick with me. What comes next costs nothing to copy, but it could completely change the way you live, think, and carry yourself. First secret: they decide before they feel ready. Wealthy women don't wait for confidence to take action. They know confidence is born after the decision, not before. While many people get stuck waiting for the right moment, more certainty or more validation, they choose first and grow strong along the way. This is one of the simplest and most overlooked secrets of a prosperous life. I noticed this by observing women who always seemed one step ahead. They weren't less afraid or more lucky. They just didn't negotiate with indecision. When an opportunity came up, they didn't ask, "What if it goes wrong?" But instead, "What happens if I don't try?" That one change in the question changes everything. For a long time, I waited to feel ready to change my habits, ask for a raise, charge more, or walk away from situations that made me feel small. And while I waited, nothing changed. It was only when I decided to act despite the fear that things started to shift. It wasn't comfortable, but it was freeing. Each decision strengthened my identity, and confidence became a consequence, not a prerequisite. Wealthy women understand that indecision is expensive. It costs time, energy, and opportunities. They prefer to course correct while moving than stay stuck planning a perfect route that never starts. If you feel like you're always waiting to be ready, this might be the very thing keeping you stuck. Comment, "I decide and grow stronger along the way." This affirmation marks the beginning of a new posture, that of someone who chooses to act, even if they're shaking. Second secret: they protect their energy like it's an asset. Wealthy women understand something most people ignore. Energy is an invisible asset. Talent, dreams, and opportunities mean nothing if you're constantly drained, exhausted, and emotionally overloaded. That's why they're extremely mindful of where they invest their time, attention, and emotions. Not out of coldness, but out of wisdom. I noticed this in women who always seemed centered, even in chaotic environments. They didn't get involved in unnecessary drama, didn't over-explain, didn't try to save everyone. At first it seemed selfish. Then I understood. It was self-awareness. They knew every yes said out of guilt was a silent no to their own life. For a long time I felt tired without knowing why, until I realized my energy was scattered. People who only complained, conversations that went nowhere, commitments made out of obligation. When I started being more intentional about where I placed my attention, something shifted. I didn't get more hours in the day, I gained more presence. And with more presence, I started making better decisions. Wealthy women aren't available all the time. They don't meet every demand, don't respond to every expectation, and don't explain themselves to everyone. They understand that protecting their energy is what allows them to grow with clarity and consistency. If you're constantly exhausted, the problem might not be a lack of rest, but too much access. Comment, "My energy is valuable." This phrase marks the moment you stop giving out of obligation and start prioritizing yourself with intention. Third secret: they talk to themselves in ways that build, not sabotage. Before any visible change takes place, there's an invisible dialogue shaping everything. Wealthy women know this. They understand that the way they talk to themselves defines the level of life they're able to sustain. Not because they chant magical phrases, but because they choose words that uplift rather than diminish. For a long time, I didn't even notice how I spoke to myself. It was automatic: harsh criticism, constant pressure, silent comparisons. Whenever something went wrong, the inner voice came quickly. "Of course you failed. This isn't for you. You always mess everything up." That voice seemed real, logical, even responsible. But in practice, it kept me small. I observed women who were thriving and noticed something curious. When they made mistakes, they didn't attack themselves. They analyzed, adjusted, moved on. Their inner dialogue was different. Instead of, "I'm not capable," they asked, "What can I learn from this?" Instead of, "It didn't work," they said, "It hasn't worked yet." That shift may seem small, but it changes everything, because your brain believes what you repeat. When I started taking care of that dialogue, something subtle happened. My posture changed. I took more risks. I charged more. I stood my ground more firmly. Not because I had more money, but because I had more self-respect. Wealthy women build wealth in their minds first. They don't treat themselves as a problem. They treat themselves as a work in progress. If you feel like you sabotage yourself without realizing it, the issue might not be a lack of ability, but an excess of internal harshness. Changing the way you think, carry yourself, and treat yourself is already a huge step. But for many women, there's still a silent burden: financial insecurity. That constant feeling that you can't choose freely, that you have to over-adapt, accept less than you deserve, or postpone dreams because money still makes the decisions. It wears you down, holds you back, and weakens you, even when on the outside it looks like you're making progress. The problem isn't a lack of effort or skill. It's the relationship with money you were taught to have, one based on fear, scarcity, and survival. And as long as that relationship doesn't change, neither will your freedom. That's why I created the Wealth Code, a simple and accessible guide to rebuild your relationship with money, create financial security, and live with the ease of choosing your own path, without depending on anyone, and without carrying guilt or fear. If you feel ready to support the woman you're becoming with more confidence and calm, the link is in the first pinned comment. Fourth secret: they choose strategic silence over the need to prove something. Wealthy women don't feel the constant need to explain, justify, or defend themselves. They've learned that trying to prove their worth is often a silent sign of insecurity, and that real power lies in knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. That silence isn't passivity, it's emotional mastery. It took me a while to understand this. Every time someone questioned me, I over-explained. When people doubted me, I tried to convince them. When I was underestimated, I worked twice as hard to be accepted. It was exhausting, and in the end, it rarely changed anyone's perception. Until I realized that women who truly command respect don't chase validation, they state their position and move on. I observed successful women in tough environments. When provoked, they didn't react immediately. When misunderstood, they didn't get into long debates. They simply held their ground, calmly repeated their boundaries, or quietly walked away. And that created a curious effect. Their silence spoke louder than any argument. When I started practicing this strategic silence, something shifted. People began to listen more. My words carried more weight. I stopped wearing myself out trying to be understood by those who didn't want to understand. I realized that not every explanation is necessary, and not every battle is worth the energy. Wealthy women know that when you have inner clarity, you don't need to convince anyone. They trust themselves so deeply that they don't engage in emotional games. If you feel like you talk too much trying to be accepted, maybe it's time to explore the power of saying less and standing taller. Comment: "My silence is strength too." This affirmation marks the moment you stop justifying yourself and start respecting yourself. Fifth secret: they keep the promises they make to themselves. There's a kind of confidence that doesn't come from praise or external validation. It comes from keeping the promises you make to yourself. Wealthy women understand this deeply. Before being trustworthy to the world, they're trustworthy to themselves, and that changes everything. For a long time, I made small promises and broke them without even noticing. I'll start tomorrow. Monday, I'll change. This week, I'll get organized. They seemed harmless, but each broken promise chipped away at my self-esteem. I didn't realize it, but I was teaching my brain that my words didn't carry weight. And when your word means nothing to you, the world senses that. I observed thriving women and noticed a quiet pattern. They didn't overpromise, but they followed through, especially when no one was watching. If they said they'd wake up early, they did. If they said they'd save money, they saved. If they said they'd leave a situation that belittled them, they left. That inner commitment created a firm, almost magnetic presence. When I started doing the same, everything shifted. I began with small, doable, almost too simple promises, but each one I kept reinforced something inside me. I can trust myself, and that trust began reflecting in everything, in how I spoke, what I charged, how I chose, and how I stood my ground. Wealthy women don't depend on motivation. They rely on inner alignment. They know discipline is a quiet form of self-respect. If you feel like you've lost trust in yourself, maybe it's not about a lack of strength, but too many broken promises. Comment: "I keep the promises I make to myself." This affirmation seals a new pact between you and the woman you're becoming. Sixth secret: They invest in themselves before expecting results from life. Wealthy women don't wait for life to prove they deserve more before they start caring for themselves, getting organized, or taking themselves seriously. They do the opposite. They invest in themselves first, their time, their mind, their emotional health, their knowledge, and let the results follow. This is a quiet secret because it doesn't make noise, but it builds solid foundations. I learned this by observing women who always seemed one step ahead, even when they didn't have it all figured out. They studied when no one told them to, took care of their bodies even when they were busy, organized their lives before chaos turned into crisis. It wasn't perfectionism, it was long-term vision. They understood that no one takes care of your future better than you. For a long time, I did the opposite. I'd say, when I have more money, I'll take care of myself. When life gets better, I'll study. When I have time, I'll invest in me. But life never improved, time never freed up, and money never came. It was only when I flipped the logic and started treating myself as a priority that things began to change. Small investments in myself brought huge emotional and practical returns. Wealthy women don't put themselves last. They know the world responds to the level of value you assign to yourself. When you treat yourself like you matter, everything around you starts to realign. If you keep pushing yourself to the back burner, maybe it's not a lack of opportunity, but a lack of internal permission. Comment, I am my best investment. This affirmation marks the moment you choose to care for yourself before demanding results from life. 7th secret. They say no without guilt and without long explanations. Wealthy women understand something that completely changes how they live. Every yes said out of guilt comes at a high price. It costs time, energy, focus, and often money. That's why they learn to say no with calm, firmness, and without needing to justify every decision. Not because they're cold, but because they know boundaries are a form of respect for themselves and for others. It took me a long time to learn this. Anytime someone asked for something, I said yes automatically. I was afraid of disappointing people, of seeming selfish, of losing affection. The result was always the same. I ended up overwhelmed, resentful, and further away from my own goals. Until I realized that every time I said yes to something I didn't want, I was saying no to the life I wanted to build. I observed prosperous women and noticed they didn't over-explain. I can't right now was enough. This doesn't work for me ended the conversation. And interestingly, the less they explained, the more they were respected. Clear boundaries created authority. When I started practicing this, I felt guilty at first. But soon came clarity. My schedule became lighter, my decisions more aligned, and my energy more focused. I learned that saying no doesn't push the right people away. It only pushes away what doesn't respect your boundaries. Wealthy women don't live to please. They live to build. And those with a clear purpose don't negotiate their limits. If you struggle to say no, maybe it's not a lack of manners, but too much fear of disappointing others. Comment, my boundaries make me stronger. This affirmation marks the moment you choose to respect yourself without guilt. 8th secret. They grow in silence and let the results speak. Wealthy women don't feel the need to announce plans, prove they're evolving, or justify their choices. They've learned that the less energy you spend talking, the more you have to build. True growth happens in silence, and the results show up making noise on their own. I learned this when I realized that every time I shared my plans with too many people, something got lost. Other people's opinions, doubts, and fears started blending with mine, and what began as excitement turned into uncertainty. Then I noticed something about women who grew consistently. They didn't share everything. They protected their ideas, worked quietly, and only spoke once it was done. When I started doing the same, something shifted inside me. I became more focused, more disciplined, less anxious for validation. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. My energy was fully in the process, not in the approval. And as a result, my outcomes started appearing faster and more solidly. Silence creates space for consistency, and consistency builds wealth. Wealthy women know that success doesn't need an audience. It needs direction. If you feel the urge to share everything you plan to do, maybe you're still seeking validation. Try doing it in silence and see how your power multiplies. Comment, my growth happens in silence. Gareth, this affirmation reinforces your decision to focus more on building than on explaining. 9th secret. They think long-term even when everything pushes for instant gratification. Wealthy women see beyond the now. While many people make decisions based on short-term relief, spending to feel better, quitting to avoid discomfort, choosing the easy route to escape the hard one, they make choices based on the woman they want to be in 5, 10, or 20 years. That long-term mindset completely changes the course of life. I realized this when I started observing my own patterns. Whenever things got uncomfortable, I'd look for a quick reward. Impulsive shopping, distractions, a break that turned into abandonment. It gave me momentary relief but kept me stuck in the same place. That's when I understood. Women who build wealth don't live at the mercy of instant pleasure. They choose what sustains future peace. I observed women who prospered consistently and noticed a common trait. They handled temporary discomfort with maturity. They studied even when there were no results, saved money while others spent, said not now so they could say yes later. It wasn't rigidity, it was vision. They knew every choice was a vote for the kind of life they were building. When I started adopting this mindset, something shifted deeply. I began asking myself with each decision, does this bring me closer to or further from the life I want? That one question saved me time, money, and energy. And little by little, I began to feel a different kind of security, the security of someone who knows where they're going. Wealthy women don't live by impulse. They live by intention. They understand that true luxury is the freedom built with patience. If you feel like you're constantly putting out fires and never moving forward, maybe it's not a lack of effort, but too many impulsive decisions. Comment, I choose with my future in mind. This affirmation marks the start of a life guided by intention, not impulse. 10th secret. They take full responsibility for their lives. This is the most uncomfortable secret, and the most liberating. Wealthy women don't outsource their story. They don't blame the past, circumstances, family, partner, or lack of opportunity. They understand that responsibility isn't guilt, it's power. When you accept that everything you build ultimately depends on your choices, you reclaim control of your life. It took me a while to understand this. For a long time, I blamed external factors for what wasn't working. And without realizing it, every excuse was a way of giving away my power. It was only when I stopped asking, why is this happening to me? And started asking, what can I do with this? That everything began to shift. Life got more challenging, yes, but infinitely freer. I observed women who prospered and noticed they had something in common. They didn't wait to be rescued. They showed up, took action, adjusted course when needed, and moved forward. That kind of posture creates an inner strength no one can take away, because it doesn't depend on approval or perfect conditions. When you take responsibility, you stop feeling like a victim and start feeling like the author. And that changes everything. Your attitude, your decisions, your energy, your results. Wealthy women know no one else will live their life for them. That's why they choose to lead their own story with awareness and courage. If you feel ready to stop waiting and start building, this might be the missing secret. Comment, I am responsible for the life I'm creating. This affirmation seals your decision to take the wheel of your own journey. These secrets cost nothing, but they do require courage. The courage to decide before you're ready, protect your energy, change your inner dialogue, choose silence, keep promises, invest in yourself, set boundaries, grow quietly, think long-term, and take full responsibility for your life. Wealthy women weren't born that way. They became that way. One silent habit at a time. One conscious choice a day. And the most powerful part is knowing that you can start now, with no money, no permission, and no need to wait for another sign. If this video spoke to you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and drop this in the comments. I choose to live with more awareness and power, because when you change how you live, think, and carry yourself, life responds, and nothing is ever the same again.